So we're going to watch some birth scenes from films and sitcoms because I think the media has a lot to answer for when it comes to how people think labour looks, how people are positioned, what they look like, what other people are doing. So let's dive in and see. So she's having contractions. Here comes David Hasselhoff. Oh, look, he's going to help her get back to the beach. Oh, and she's really struggling. I think they're trying to show that she's really in established labour. I've never quite seen a woman in labour walk like that. What's going to happen? Huh? What's he doing? Why has he put her on her back? I think if she'd been left to her own devices, she just would have stayed on hands and knees. I don't know why he thought he had to flip her over. She got really sandy. The sand's going to be everywhere. And I'll tell you, the costume didn't come off, but we'll just overlook that fact. I can understand why they didn't film that bit. But thing is, if you're at the beach and your contraction started, you would have time to pack up your picnic, ring a friend, say, come and get me, I think I'm in labour. And you certainly wouldn't walk into the sea. That's the bit you didn't see. She was walking into the sea and sort of collapsing forwards. You wouldn't do that, would you, if you were having major contractions? Because women, make sure that they're safe to have the baby. And if they feel in any way that they're not safe, it'll shut down, the contractions will go. Say if you've got children and you wait till they're at nursery or at school, or the grandparents have arrived to look after them, and then the labour gets underway. So I just don't think it would happen like that. So he's got the clip for the umbilical cord. I haven't actually seen that the baby had come out yet. He's reading some instructions, got some special scissors. And he's going straight in there. And here's the baby. Gosh, that was very quick. And she's very relieved. And he is too. And the baby's very, very clean. So I don't know why he rushed in. Before the clip that you saw, he'd run to get his kit and he'd radioed for help. So there were definitely people coming on, going to be there soon. So there was no rush to cut the cord. He certainly didn't wait for white, which is to let all the blood flow out of the umbilical cord to the baby, taking lots of oxygen, stem cells, lots of things that the baby could do with, rather than just cutting the cord and not having the opportunity to get that through to the baby. And there's no reason, even if a baby's got a short cord, you could just bring the baby to the mum's tummy, even if not up to the chest. So you could have left it intact, and I guess you'd want to keep the baby warm, wouldn't you? But a very clean baby, no vernix, that white stuff that they're covered in that helps their skin while they're in utero, no blood and no sand. The way she was positioned on the beach, there must have been sand, surely. Oh, here's Rachel and Ross. I've seen this clip a lot of times. Oh, he got headbutted. Well, this is something we're going to see again and again, because there seems to be, especially in comedies, but actually in some that aren't comedies, this thing about partners not realising the amount of pain or the intensity of the contractions that the woman's going through. And so some joke is made about how they think the pain that they got from headbutts or something else is much, much more. And I think, I know, it's for comedy, but 98% of the birth partners that I've ever had come to birth preparation workshops, or, heard about from women who come to my pregnancy yoga classes, 98% of birth partners are absolutely amazing, and they're incredibly supportive, and they're helping remind them of breathing techniques or whatever's going to help, and they're just, solid as a rock. So I think it does a bit of a disservice, doesn't it, when you keep bringing this same joke up again and again. but it does make me laugh every single time. And then we keep seeing him holding her legs right back. Why? Why is he pushing her legs back? Has the midwife told him to do that? But it creates a lot of pressure as you're bearing down, to have your legs pushed back. It places lots of pressure on the pelvic floor and the perineum, and would just be annoying. I would imagine most women would just be like, get off me, leave my legs alone. And we know that if you push the knees wide as the baby's coming out, it actually closes the pelvic outlet. So, obviously if they need to do some intervention, they need to use forceps or ventouse, then you have to have some space to work. But if everything's happening fine, keep the knees closer and actually make some more space at the pelvic outlet. If you imagine the thigh bones, if the knees are being pushed out and the balls and the sockets are being pushed together, and it actually closes the pubic symphysis at the front, it just not very helpful from a biomechanics point of view. So I just keep thinking, get off her legs! And this is another one where there's a joke being made. Oh, and then the two people on her legs. So first of all, he was saying that he didn't want to sit in the middle because he thought he was going to be sick, and she was swearing at him because she said, look, I'm going through a lot more right now, so you sit in the middle, I'm sitting on the outside, thank you very much. So again, this kind of joke that, the guy, it's always a guy, is trying to, I don't know, steal some of the limelight, or I don't know what it's about. I just find it a bit strange, really, that these jokes are always made about the partners. And then two of them pushing against her legs. Oh, again, I just think there's so much pressure then into the perineum. And, you want to be able to move. You can actually move any point during the second stage, as the baby's moving the head down, and then there's sometimes a pause after the head is out, and women left to their own devices will move position so that the baby's shoulders can come through more easily. But if somebody's got your legs yanked back, that ain't going to happen, is it? So it looks like she's lying down. She's really pushing hard. Oh, and the baby's shot clean out. Now, obviously, Big Fish is, it's about weird things happening. So they're not trying to make it realistic. But I think it's quite useful to talk about, because we think of the uterus as being strong because it makes strong contractions, but obviously the baby would drop down with gravity. So if you're standing to give birth, then the baby can drop down. But often a woman left to her own devices would choose a kneeling, leaning position and can guide the baby down to the ground. And often instinctive behaviour is that you bring the baby down in front of you and have a good look at the baby, take the baby in, just let everything that's happened sink in for a moment, and then the mum brings the baby up to her chest. And I think this thing about words and a baby being delivered rather than talking about the mum birthing the baby, or it should be about who's maybe catching the baby. But I think words are really important. So I was looking into what force does a uterus exert during contractions, and I couldn't really find very much. There was only one place, and it said 470 pounds, which apparently was equivalent to 3 men, the weight of 3 men. So we know that contractions are strong, but especially when you're lying down, you're not working with gravity. So baby wouldn't shoot out that quickly. They tend to come out more quickly if you're upright. Got another funny one here from the Addams family. So Hand is helping with the forceps. Doctor gets scared and the hand slaps the baby on the bottom. Really doesn't look like a real baby, does it? It looks like a weird doll baby. But they used to do this. They used to hold the baby upside down and give it a slap if the baby wasn't crying, and to help clear the lungs of fluid. Now they would use a little suction device to help clear the baby's lungs. But if a baby's come out vaginally, very often the squeezing as they come out through the vaginal passage helps do that. But they don't hang them upside down anymore. You usually try and get you to hold the baby for skin to skin so they can keep warm against you. You get this flush across the chest so that the chest's a bit warmer than it was, for that reason, to help the baby stay nice and cosy. Oh, so this is from The Handmaid's Tale in 1990, and she's sitting. I quite liked her position before, like knees open. If it was the first stage of labour, would help the baby engage. But when they sat her up, why did they sat her up in that position? There's nowhere for the baby to come out, is there? And not very long after that, the baby's held up. So the baby came like 30 seconds after what you just saw. That ain't going to happen, is it, against the bed? So although she was sitting up, she'd have to be kind of right on the edge of the bed. Anywhere where you're lying down, you want to push the sacrum against the bed and it can't move. There's so much movement available if you're off your back to make more space through the pelvis. But if you're lying on your back, or if you're sitting directly on the exit, the baby ain't going to come out. Plus, the other thing about that, did you notice there were loads of people around? There were women in blue suits. I don't know if you've seen The Handmaid's Tale or read the book. Probably not one to read during pregnancy, because it's very odd how the women are getting pregnant. Very interesting story. But yeah, a lot of people around, which might suit some people. Some people might love to have children around, have family members around, and that actually helps them relax. But for a lot of people, that would completely put them off. They'd feel watched and they'd feel overexposed and they wouldn't feel private. Certainly wouldn't work for me. So this is a later version of The Handmaid's Tale, 2017. And there's lots of people around. They're saying push and breathe to her. And so again, this thing about, for some people, it might help to have lots of people around you that you care about, that make you feel safe. But it could also be people you don't know, so you might never have met the midwife before, but they might also ask if a student midwife can be there. And it's totally your choice. You don't have to say yes. Often in birth stories, I hear really good things about the student midwife because they're just totally focused on the mum. They're not having to take notes or anything. But you might have a registrar come in, or a consultant. You might have an anaesthetist come in. There might be people coming that distract you. You don't want your brain to be thinking, who's this, who's that, feeling vulnerable. You want to feel private, really, to make the right kind of birth hormones continue, all the oxytocin. So some people I know put a notice on the door, like, please knock before you come in. And, or only people I really need to be in here, something to that effect. Because it might completely change how your contractions are. You might suddenly feel unsafe and the contractions just fade. And then it's really dispiriting if that happens and you have to try and get back to a good rhythm with the contractions. It's very normal to arrive at hospital, if that's where you're going, and have a fade in the contractions. There might be a surge of adrenaline as you get to that new environment. And it's really important to wait half an hour to, once you're in the room that you're going to give birth in, or in the assessment room, give it at least half an hour to calm down, the nervous system sort of regulate and get back to where you are. Nothing should be decided in that first time while you're settling. This is quite dark, but she's by herself giving birth, and look, she's in a instinctive position. She's kneeling and leaning. It's very intense. Oh yeah, here comes the baby, and she's caught the baby. So she had gone to the antenatal classes that happen in The Handmaid's Tale and learnt about breathing, and then when it came to it, she was all by herself, and so she chose an instinctive position. She didn't lie on her back. She did what was most comfortable, gravity helping the baby down, being able to move. If mum can move, then baby can move into the best position for the next part of the birth. So I think it was shown as a very dramatic moment of the story, but actually from a physiological birth point of view, from a normal birth point of view, being left alone meant that she chose things that helped her baby come out. So, and it was dark, so that's also helpful. It gets the melatonin in the brain releasing, which then helps the oxytocin, which helps the contractions. With the fire, hopefully it was nice and warm and relaxed. She didn't feel watched. Yeah, some good things about that. If you know the story, you know there was a lot of stuff going on for her, so she had a lot of stress, so she did amazingly in the circumstances. So she's at the hospital, and I think she's a doctor, but she's got the computer on talking to a work colleague, and she's been trying to answer questions, and the midwife or doctor says, you know, we're trying to have a baby here. And she's absolutely right, because it's the old part of the brain, reptilian brain, that controls reproduction, digestion, and giving birth. You know, like we don't sit there and think, right, now I'm going to digest this piece of food and I'm going to move it through the intestines. It happens outside of our conscious control. And the same, you know, if you're trying to have sex, it doesn't really help if there's bright lights and there's somebody talking, you know, a stranger talking to you, and they're timing you, and like what can happen in a clinical environment. And the same for birth. It's not within our conscious control. We can't decide, oh, at midday I'm going to start having contractions. It happens when it happens. And so we're trying to do things to help us switch off that newer part of the brain, the neocortex, and that's why things like hypnobirthing can help, because it's taking us into a different state and helping us to soothe our nervous system. But if you're on a work call to somebody, then, you know, who's asking you questions and you're giving instructions and you're working technology, puts you in completely the wrong frame of mind to get all the birth hormones flowing nicely. So big cross there. Definitely switch it off. Nobody's indispensable. And then there was another of those times when the partner is in incredible pain and is trying not to say anything. And, you know, I know student midwives who've, you know, had and partners who've had their hands squeezed so hard that they're sort of bruised the next day, or, you know, got bruises on their arms. But I don't know why they always have to put it in labour scenes, that the partner's having this terrible time of it. It would just be amazing to see a birth partner being absolutely awesome, as most of them are. So she had looked around for somebody to help her and nobody came. So she got in her car and she's having contractions. So she stopped the car. Very wise. Going through the contraction, and then after that she starts going again to get to the hospital. And I know somebody who had to go to hospital on a bicycle, and she's coming to pregnancy yoga at the moment at the time I film this, but with her first one she was meant to have a lift from the neighbour, but it happened on the night she went into labour. The neighbour's car was at the garage. It was going to take too long for a taxi to come, so she got on her bike, and every time she had a contraction she stopped. And then she'd start again. Next contraction, she would stop. And she made it to the hospital that way. It's about, well, normally it would probably take her 10 minutes to cycle. And she arrived, and very soon afterwards, she had her baby. So apparently all the midwives were joking about how they should recommend everybody gets on a bicycle. But she'd been cycling to my class all the way up to being full term. So, you wouldn't want to start mid-pregnancy, but if you're used to it, it's a great form of exercise. So things like this actually happen. And with cars, if you've got somebody else driving the car, hopefully you have, what I really recommend is getting in the back seat, because cars tend to have these sort of bucket seats that tip us back into a position where we close around the baby, and it makes the contraction so much more painful and much, much harder to manage. So if you get in the back of the car, you've got more room to play around with, and you can even face sideways across the car and have the seatbelt around you, and it just means you can move and brace on the seat during contraction. You can move the pelvis to make things more comfortable. So check your baby's car seat fits in and that you know how to fit it, but then put it in the boot so you've got as much room as possible in the back of the car, and that super helps people who come to my classes. And then she makes it to the hospital and she's kneeling, and the midwife's right there letting her know that she's supported. And so I like that. It definitely, over time, through these films and sitcoms, it is changing. So instead of women always being on their back, they are being shown in more active positions. So that's such a good thing. So she's lying on her back to begin with, and then things heat up and she decides to move forwards and onto all fours. And so the lady's going round behind to see what's happening. And again, that's great. You're able to move a bit more. You're taking the weight of your body off the sacrum, so the sacrum can move and make more space for the baby to come through. Probably come through more slowly than if you were upright. So it takes the pressure off the perineum, gives more time for all the tissue to stretch and avoid tears. And it's great. I think it's really good that they're showing that change in position. And what was funnier, just before the point that she started to really feel the contractions, she'd been smiling, very serene, laying back like, oh yeah, this is fine. And then suddenly things heated up, and it was almost like she went into this animal mode, this kind of primal, like, I need to move, I need to get out of being on my back. So I like that sort of image of her feeling empowered to be in a different position. So this one, she'd had an interpreter, so everything was being relayed through somebody else. And at one point she said, I just can't do this, I can't do it. And I think, what was nice was that the lady that was with her just said, yes, you can, looked her in the eye and gave her that confidence. That was what you really need, especially when you're in transition. So transition is between the first stage of labour, where dilating to make space for the baby to come out, and the second stage is where the baby's being pushed down and out. And these are all sort of classifications. It can look really different for different women, but it sort of helps us talk about different parts of labour. And transition is where you suddenly get this surge of adrenaline that helps you suddenly become more aware of your outside environment. Up until that point, you might have been much more internal and really focused on the sensations in your body. And suddenly this adrenaline comes to, before we were in hospitals or in our houses, to look around, check everything's safe and be ready to protect your baby when the baby's born. So it often happens not long before the baby could come out. And the thing is that sometimes as people come out of that birth bubble, they suddenly start to think about things and might feel like, oh, this is too overwhelming, I can't do it. And so you really need that reassurance from somebody who can just look you in the eye and go, yes, you can. Other times, people might just have a good look around. They might change position completely, have a good look around, and then get back to it. It might not come out as a sort of illogical thing like, I'm not doing this anymore, get my coat, that sort of thing that we tend to hear about. And then the baby came out, and so this baby had vernix. So that just goes to show, as time's gone on, they started to show more realistically how babies look as they come out. So that's a great thing. So this is another birth where there's lots of people around. And the dad says Sam should be having the baby at the hospital, not in a kiddie pool. So the couple are both in a birth pool, and the mum then says, I think you should go to another room and wait because you're not being helpful. And this is the thing, you have to be really careful who's in your birth space. Give some thought about which birth location makes it more likely that you have the support that you want. So, you might have a dedicated home birth service where you live, maybe not. You might have a midwife-led unit or not. But reading up about how birth location affects things, ask your midwife or your caregiver, what do they think about birth? What are their views about physiological birth? What do they think about biomechanics of birth and techniques for helping babies' positioning? You can ask them about how they feel about all these things to be clear on, who's going to be on your side. And to, with your birth partner, to do the birth plans together. I'd recommend having a plan A, a plan B, a plan C, a plan D. So you've thought about different scenarios and what you would want to do in each of those scenarios. And then you're on the same page and you can really make an informed decision. It's very hard, I think, for a midwife to get somebody up to speed, or a doctor to get somebody up to speed, if they don't really know anything about interventions and they've got to try and give you a lot of information when, like we said before, you don't really want the thinking brain to be working. You want to just be in this birth space where you're letting your body do the work that it needs to do. So the more preparation you've done beforehand, the much easier it is to feel like you're giving informed consent at every step of the way. And you definitely don't want somebody who doesn't agree with how you want to try to do things there at the time. So yeah, very dismissive to say, kiddie pool, isn't it? So language is so important. And then the baby's arrived, and the partner, they're both just in complete awe. And I thought I'd finish with that one because it's so lovely. And we were talking about it recently in my pregnancy yoga class about women who've already had babies. What did they say when the baby was born? And so many of them didn't actually say anything. Maybe they were crying happy tears, or maybe they were just looking at the baby, overwhelmed by what they'd just done, or taking the enormity of it in. So yeah, often there aren't words. Or it might be, that you didn't know the baby's gender and the partner's announcing that. But I loved that look of complete awe and wonderment. So that's where I wanted to finish. So thank you for joining me. I hope you agree that media has a massive effect on how we see things. And it's definitely improving over time. And we've got shows like Call the Midwife, which I love to watch. But the thing with Call the Midwife is that, it's set in the past. So they show a lot of really great things that actually, would be great to bring back, like more vaginal breech births. So a lot of midwives have lost experience of doing those. But some things we don't tend to do anymore, like sort of castor oil. So it's not always good as birth preparation. And then of course we have things like One Born Every Minute, and it's about the entertainment and the drama. So I'm most often sort of shouting at the TV when I watch that. But I think it is changing, isn't it, for the better? Like from the 1990s up to the current date, it's definitely showing the shift in childbirth and how some people are choosing to go towards home births and using more active birth positions. So I think it's positive, but I think, We have to keep pushing for more helpful depictions of women in labour. Thank you for joining me. I hope you enjoyed it as much as I did.